They laughed at me during Mom's will reading, then my daughter stood up and said 6 words that changed everything. They say grief comes in waves. What they don't tell you is that family drama can create a tsunami that threatens to drown you completely. I never thought I'd find myself in a lawyer's office, feeling like the butt of some cosmic joke as my relatives laughed at my expense. But that's exactly where I ended up 3 weeks after we laid my mother to rest. I'm a nurse at the local hospital, and for the past 5 years, I put my entire life on hold to care for my mother as cancer slowly took her from us. It wasn't a burden, it was an honor. We'd always been close, and those final years, despite the pain and heartache, gave us time together that I'll treasure forever. My relatives, on the other hand, could barely be bothered to visit. My mother's sister, her husband, and their 2 adult children would make obligatory appearances on major holidays, staying just long enough to comment on my simple lifestyle and how I really should get out more. Not once did they offer to give me a break from caregiving. Not once did they sit with her so I could have a full night's sleep. "Your aunt is very busy with her charity committee," my mother would say with a small smile. I knew that smile. It wasn't approval, it was resignation. "And your cousins have their careers to think about." What my mother never said aloud, but I understood perfectly well, was that her sister had always been focused on appearances and status. My cousins had inherited that same materialistic outlook, along with their father's cutting arrogance. To them, caring for an aging, ill relative was beneath their dignity. When the call came that my mother had passed, I was holding her hand. My aunt arrived 6 hours later, already talking about arrangements and asking if my mother had sorted her affairs properly. My cousins texted their condolences, citing work commitments that would prevent them from helping with funeral preparations. The funeral itself was a blur of tears and half-remembered conversations. I noticed my aunt eyeing the framed photos I'd displayed, particularly the one of my mother in front of her modest but cherished home. My cousin whispered something to his sister, both snickering before composing their faces into appropriate solemnity when others looked their way. Then came the email from the lawyer, setting up the will reading for 3 weeks after the funeral. I dreaded it, not because of what my mother might have left me, but because it meant another confrontation with relatives who had made it clear they considered me the family disappointment. My daughter, home from college to support me, squeezed my hand as we sat in the waiting room of the law office. "It'll be over soon, Mom," she whispered. "Then we never have to see them again if you don't want to." My aunt, uncle, and cousins arrived precisely on time, dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a family gathering to honor my mother's final wishes. My Aunt Air kissed my cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. "You look tired, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I suppose that's to be expected when you're not used to handling serious matters." My uncle nodded solemnly. "Good thing you have us to help navigate this. Your mother was never particularly savvy with financial matters, but we'll make sure everything is sorted properly." I bit my tongue, thinking of how my mother had carefully budgeted her teacher's pension, maintained her home without debt, and even managed to put aside savings despite her modest income. Meanwhile, my aunt and uncle lived in a house too big for them, constantly complaining about property taxes while buying new luxury cars every 2 years. My cousin, the older one, glanced around the tastefully appointed office. "I hope this doesn't take long. I have a dinner reservation at that new exclusive restaurant downtown." His sister nodded. "And I need to stop by Mom and Dad's to measure for the new furniture. The interior designer can only meet tomorrow." I frowned. "New furniture for what?" My aunt patted my arm. "Oh, nothing for you to worry about, dear." Before I could press further, the lawyer's assistant called us in. The lawyer, a serious-looking man in his 50s, greeted us all with professional courtesy. "Thank you all for coming today. I was your mother's lawyer for many years," he nodded at me, "and I'm here to execute her final wishes according to her last will and testament." We all sat around a polished conference table, my daughter beside me, my relatives across from us. The lawyer began reading the standard legal preamble, then moved on to small bequests. A distant cousin received a small sum, her church building fund got a modest donation. Then came the main estate. I steeled myself, expecting my mother to have divided things fairly, perhaps with a bit more coming to me as I'd been her caregiver. What I heard instead made my stomach drop. "To my beloved sister and her family, I leave my house, its contents, all my investments and savings accounts, with the following exceptions as noted below." I glanced up, stunned. My aunt's face bloomed into a triumphant smile. My uncle sat straighter in his chair. My cousins exchanged excited looks. To my daughter, the lawyer continued, I leave my collection of gardening books and the blue teapot we used for our afternoon talks, along with the sum of $5,000. $5,000. The blue teapot. Gardening books. The room seemed to tilt around me. My mother's house wasn't a mansion, but it was worth at least $300,000. Her savings, while not extensive, would easily be another $100,000. And I was getting books and a teapot? A choked sound escaped me. My daughter grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing hard. Is that everything? I managed to ask. The lawyer nodded, his expression unreadable. That concludes the distribution of assets as outlined in this document. Well, my aunt couldn't contain herself any longer. I always knew my sister would do the right thing in the end. Blood is thicker than water, after all. My uncle chuckled. She understood who would be the proper stewards of her estate. All that time playing nursemaid? My cousin said, not even bothering to lower his voice, and all you get is a chipped old teapot? Ouch. His sister laughed outright. Maybe there's a valuable first edition in those gardening books, huh? Better check. I guess Mom finally realized who really mattered in the family, my aunt said, her voice smug. All those years we told her you were just hanging around for the inheritance, and look, she finally saw the truth. I couldn't speak. My eyes burned with tears I refused to shed in front of them. My mother and I had been so close. We'd shared everything. How could she have done this? Had I misunderstood our relationship completely? That teapot's probably from a discount store anyway, my younger cousin said, examining her manicure. At least you can make yourself some tea while you figure out where you're going to live now. Where I'm going to live? I repeated, confused. My aunt's smile turned predatory. Well, dear, we'll need to sell the house, of course. The market is excellent right now, and that neighborhood has really come up in value. You'll need to have your things out by the end of the month. I live there, I stammered. All my things. Well, those are now our things, technically, my uncle pointed out, his tone matter of fact. But we're not monsters. Take what's personally yours, of course. The lawyer cleared his throat, but my relatives were on a roll now, dividing up my mother's possessions, my home, right in front of me. That antique sideboard will look perfect in our dining room, my aunt said to my uncle, and those silver picture frames can go in the guest bathroom. I want the jewelry, my female cousin chimed in, especially that pearl necklace. I felt sick. The pearl necklace had been my grandmother's. My mother had always said it would be mine someday, and we should sell that old car of hers, my male cousin added. It's not worth much, but every little bit counts, right? They laughed together, a family united in their victory, while I sat in stunned silence. The lawyer shuffled his papers, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. I couldn't believe this was happening. My mother had always been so fair, so loving. She'd made me promise to stay in the house after she was gone, saying it gave her peace knowing I'd be secure. Had that been a lie? Or had she changed her mind without telling me? My thoughts were a chaotic mess. I'd spent 5 years caring for her, watching her fade day by day, holding her hand through painful treatments, reading to her when her eyes were too tired to focus on the page. I'd done it out of love, not for any inheritance. But to be left with basically nothing, while these vultures who had barely bothered to call picked over her life's possessions. A tear escaped despite my best efforts. My younger cousin noticed and smirked. Don't cry, she said in a syrupy voice entirely devoid of genuine sympathy. At least you got that ratty old teapot you two were always using. What a precious memory for you. They laughed again. I wanted to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare. The lawyer looked down at his papers, offering no help, no explanation. In that moment of utter humiliation and betrayal, I felt my daughter tense beside me. She'd been silent throughout, respectful of the proceedings, but now she slowly rose to her feet. At 23, she had my mother's straight spine and clear gaze. She looked directly at my aunt, uncle, and cousins, who were still chuckling over their good fortune. Grandma said you'd fail her test, she said clearly, her voice cutting through their laughter like a knife. The room went completely silent. My aunt's face froze mid-smile. What did you just say? My uncle's expression darkened. Young lady, this is a serious legal proceeding. Your childish outbursts are not appropriate. I'm not being childish, my daughter replied, her voice steady. I'm telling you exactly what my grandmother told me before she died. My female cousin rolled her eyes. Oh please, what test? This is ridiculous. Is it? My daughter turned to the lawyer. Sir, I believe you have something else to share with everyone? All eyes shifted to the lawyer, who was now watching the scene with what I could swear was the ghost of a smile. He cleared his throat. Actually, he said, straightening some papers, the young lady is quite correct. My aunt's triumphant expression wavered. What are you talking about? The lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. This document was entrusted to me by the deceased with explicit instructions that it was to be read only after the initial will reading was completed, and the reactions of all parties were observed. My uncle repeated, "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "Not at all," the lawyer replied calmly. "This is a legally binding codicil to the will, properly executed and witnessed according to all state laws." "A codicil?" I found my voice at last. "What does that mean?" The lawyer looked at me directly. "It means, simply put, that there are additional instructions that modify the terms of the main will, based on certain conditions or circumstances." "And what condition would that be?" my aunt demanded, her voice rising. "Perhaps it's best if I read the document," the lawyer suggested, breaking the seal on the envelope. He cleared his throat again and began to read. "I, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be a codicil to my last will and testament. Having lived a life where I've observed both kindness and cruelty, selflessness and greed, I have come to firmly believe that true character is revealed not in what people say, but in what they do when they believe they have nothing to gain or lose by their actions. To this end, I have devised a test. The initial will reading, which you have just heard, was deliberately constructed to provoke certain reactions and reveal the true nature of my family members. My lawyer has been instructed to observe and record these reactions as evidence of character." A chill ran through the room. My aunt's face had gone pale. My cousins exchanged nervous glances. Based on these observations, the lawyer continued reading, "The distribution of my estate shall now be adjusted according to the following terms." The lawyer paused, glancing around the room, before continuing. "If my sister and her family have responded to the initial will reading with grace, expressing genuine concern for my daughter who has devotedly cared for me through my illness, then the distribution shall remain as initially stated. However, if they have responded with gloating, mockery, or any form of cruelty toward my daughter, revealing that their primary interest is in material gain rather than family loyalty, then the terms shall be immediately and irrevocably altered as follows. To my daughter, I leave my house, all its contents, all my financial assets including bank accounts, investments, and insurance policies, with the exception of the specific bequests noted below. To my sister and her immediate family, I leave the collective sum of $1,000, to be divided among them as they see fit, along with my sincere hope that they might one day learn that the value of family cannot be measured in dollars and cents." The lawyer looked up. "The document is signed, dated, and properly witnessed by 2 individuals who have provided affidavits confirming the deceased was of sound mind when this codicil was created." Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. I couldn't process what I was hearing. My daughter reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. Then my aunt exploded. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, rising from her chair. "This is fraud. Undue influence. My sister would never do something so manipulative." The lawyer remained unruffled. "I assure you, she did exactly this. I advised her on the legal construction of this codicil myself. It is entirely valid and enforceable." "We'll contest it," my uncle threatened, his face flushing dark red. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer. This will never stand up in court." "You're welcome to try," the lawyer replied. "But I should inform you that your sister-in-law anticipated this reaction as well." He pulled out another document from his briefcase. "This is a video recording of your sister-in-law explaining, in her own words, why she created this unusual arrangement. She specifically addresses potential claims of undue influence or lack of capacity. Her doctor also provides a statement confirming her mental competence at the time this was recorded." My uncle's confidence visibly faltered. "Additionally," the lawyer continued, "she instructed me to inform you that should you choose to contest the will, there is a no-contest clause that would eliminate even the modest bequest you are currently set to receive." My aunt sank back into her chair, her face ashen. My male cousin leaned forward. "Let me get this straight. You're saying that because we expressed surprise at the unusual distribution in the initial will, we're being punished? That's hardly fair." The lawyer gave him a level look. "I've been in this room the entire time. I heard exactly what was said after the initial will reading. I've taken detailed notes." Would you like me to read back some of the comments made about the teapot, the gardening books, or suggestions that your cousin immediately vacate her home of many years? My cousin fell silent. My younger cousin turned to me, her expression suddenly conciliatory. Come on, you know we were just joking around. That's just our family dynamic. You can't seriously think we meant any of that. I found myself unable to respond, still trying to process the complete reversal of fortune I'd just witnessed. My daughter, however, had no such difficulty. Really? Jokes? Because Grandma certainly didn't think it was funny when you complained about having to visit her during chemo, or when you told her that her house was quaint in that condescending voice, or when you spent exactly 12 minutes at her 70th birthday party before leaving for a spa appointment. My aunt turned on my daughter. How dare you speak to us like that? This is clearly all you're doing. You manipulated your grandmother when she was weak and confused. The lawyer coughed pointedly. Perhaps this would be an appropriate moment to play a portion of the video I mentioned. Without waiting for a response, he produced a tablet from his briefcase, tapped the screen a few times, and placed it on the conference table where everyone could see. My mother's face appeared on the screen, thinner than in her healthy days, but with clear, bright eyes and her characteristic determined expression. My heart clenched at the sight of her. Hello, she began. If you're watching this, then the initial reading of my will has taken place, and my sister and her family have failed the test of character I set for them, exactly as I predicted they would. My aunt made a strangled sound. I want to be absolutely clear, my mother continued, that this decision is entirely my own. No one has influenced me in any way. I am of completely sound mind, as my doctor will shortly attest. She shifted slightly in her chair. All my life, I've watched my sister measure everything and everyone by their monetary value or social status. I've watched her teach her children the same hollow values. I've forgiven much over the years, but I cannot forgive how they've treated my daughter, who has been nothing but kind, generous, and loving, not just to me, but to all of our family. My mother's eyes seemed to look directly at me through the screen. My daughter has cared for me tirelessly through my illness, sacrificing her own comfort, time, and opportunities. Not once did she complain. Not once did she make me feel like a burden. She looked straight into the camera again. In contrast, my sister and her family visited rarely, always with excuses, always making it clear that spending time with me was an obligation to be minimized. They've made cutting remarks about my daughter's appearance, her career, her modest lifestyle, all while accepting her hospitality in my home. So yes, I devised this test, not out of cruelty, but out of a desire for justice and truth. If they had shown even a modicum of compassion or consideration for my daughter after hearing the initial will, I would have been genuinely surprised, but willing to share my estate as originally outlined. Their failure to do so only confirms what I already knew about their characters. The video ended, and the lawyer shut off the tablet. There's more, but I think that segment makes the deceased's intentions quite clear. My aunt stood up abruptly. This is emotional manipulation, plain and simple. No court will uphold a will that plays games with people's inheritances. The lawyer looked unimpressed. Actually, the courts have consistently upheld much more unusual conditional bequests than this one. Your sister consulted with both myself and another estate attorney to ensure this arrangement would stand up to any challenge. I can provide those legal opinions if you wish to see them. My uncle stood as well. Come on, he said to my aunt and cousins. We're leaving. Our lawyer will be in touch. The four of them gathered their things and headed for the door, but my aunt paused to deliver one last venomous glare in my direction. I hope you're happy, she spat. You've managed to turn my own sister against me from beyond the grave. I always knew you were manipulative, but this is a new low. I finally found my voice. I had no idea she was planning this. None whatsoever. Sure, my male cousin sneered. That's why your daughter knew all about it. All eyes turned to my daughter, who met their gazes calmly. Grandma told me the day before she died, she explained. She made me promise not to tell Mom. She said, your mother is too kind, too giving. She might try to talk me out of it, or she might give them a warning look during the reading. I need their honest reactions. So I kept her secret. My aunt made a disgusted sound and stormed out, followed by the rest of her family. When the door closed behind them, I turned to the lawyer. Is this real? Did my mother really do this? He nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly. She most certainly did, and for what it's worth, she agonized over it. She didn't want to play games with her estate, but she was deeply concerned about how her sister and her family would treat you after she was gone. Why didn't she just leave everything to me directly? I asked. She considered that, he replied, but she said she wanted to give them one last chance to show their better natures. She hoped they might surprise her. He gave a small shrug. Unfortunately, they performed exactly as she predicted. I turned to my daughter. And you knew? This whole time? She nodded, looking slightly guilty. Just for the last day of Grandma's life, and then these few weeks after. It was so hard not to tell you, Mom, especially when I saw how hurt you were during the reading. But I promised Grandma. The lawyer began gathering his papers. The house and all other assets will be transferred to your name as specified in the codicil. I'll prepare the necessary paperwork. The process should be relatively straightforward, but your sister-in-law's threats to contest the will could cause some delays. I felt overwhelmed. Do you think they really will contest it? They may try, he said, but I don't give them very good odds of success. Your mother was extremely thorough in her preparations. She even had a psychiatric evaluation done specifically to head off any claims of diminished capacity. That sounds like her, I said softly, always thinking ahead. The lawyer handed me a folder. These are copies of all the relevant documents, including the full codicil and transcripts of your mother's video statement. I suggest you keep them in a safe place. I took the folder mechanically, still trying to process everything that had happened. One more thing, the lawyer added, reaching into his briefcase one final time. He pulled out a small box and handed it to me. Your mother asked me to give you this privately, after everything else was concluded. I opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note and a key. The note read simply, "My dearest daughter, the blue teapot wasn't the only treasure I wanted you to have. Look in the back of my closet, behind the winter blankets. There's a small safe. This is the key. What's inside isn't worth much in dollars, but it meant the world to me. Just like you. All my love, Mom." Tears filled my eyes, but for the first time since my mother's death, they weren't tears of grief or hurt. They were tears of gratitude, of being known and loved so completely. My daughter and I thanked the lawyer and left his office in a daze. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and clear. I can't believe Grandma did all that, my daughter said as we walked to the car. She was always so mild and gentle. I never knew she had such a strategic mind. I laughed through my tears. Oh, she could be quite strategic when she needed to be. She just didn't show that side often. I squeezed my daughter's hand. Let's go find out what's in that safe. When we arrived home, my home, truly and securely mine now, we went straight to my mother's bedroom. In the back of her closet, behind the neatly folded winter blankets, was a small safe just as her note had described. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a bound journal, a small velvet pouch, and another envelope. The velvet pouch contained my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one my cousin had been so eager to claim. But it was the journal that truly took my breath away. It was filled with my mother's handwriting, entries spanning the last 5 years of her life. She had documented her thoughts, her moments of joy and pain, and detailed accounts of visits and interactions with family members. There were specific dates, quotes, and reflections. October 15th. Sister visited today. Stayed 30 minutes. Complained about the neighbor's new fence the entire time. Asked if I'd considered selling the house since it's too much for your daughter to maintain while caring for you. Never once asked how I was feeling after chemo. December 25th. Christmas lunch. Nephew and niece arrived 45 minutes late. Brought generic gift cards as presents. Left immediately after eating. Overheard niece telling someone on phone that she was stuck at sad aunt's deathbed Christmas. My daughter cooked for 3 days to make all their favorite dishes. And on it went. Not angry rants, but calm, factual observations that painted a clear picture of neglect and casual cruelty from my aunt and her family, contrasted with descriptions of the care and love I had shown. The envelope contained a letter, longer than the note in the box. My beloved daughter. If you're reading this, then everything has happened as I anticipated. I know you're probably shocked by what I've done. You always saw the best in everyone, including my sister and her family, even when they treated you poorly. It's one of the things I love most about you, but a mother sees everything. Every time they belittled you. Every time they took your kindness for granted. Every time they made you feel less than. I couldn't leave this world knowing they might continue treating you that way. Or worse, try to take advantage of you after I'm gone. So yes, I set a trap for them. A trap baited with the one thing I knew they couldn't resist. Money. The journal is for you, but it's also evidence should they try to challenge the will. Every entry is dated. Every quote is accurate. I may have been dying, but my mind and memory remained sharp. Don't feel guilty about how things turned out. You've done nothing wrong. You cared for me out of love, not for any inheritance. They revealed their true selves of their own free will. Now, my final wish is that you use this unexpected security to live the life you've put on hold for so long. Travel. Take that art class you always wanted to try. Turn the back garden into the sanctuary you've dreamed about. And know that wherever I am, I'm watching over you. So proud of the woman you are, and so grateful for the love you've shown me. All my love, now and always, Mom. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely now. My daughter wrapped her arms around me, and we stayed that way for a long while. She knew, I whispered. She knew exactly what they were like, and she protected me, even after she was gone. My daughter nodded against my shoulder. That's what love does, Mom. Real love protects and provides. Not like whatever that was we saw in the lawyer's office today. As we sat there on the floor of my mother's closet, surrounded by her things, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. My aunt and her family would likely make good on their threats to contest the will. There would be ugliness and stress and legal complications. But for now, in this moment, I was simply a daughter who had been loved deeply and completely by her mother. A daughter who had finally seen the truth about her family. A daughter who, despite everything, had ended up exactly where she was meant to be, home. True to their word, my aunt and her family wasted no time in trying to challenge my mother's will. 3 days after the reading, I received formal notice that they had hired a lawyer and were filing paperwork to contest the codicil on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. What does that even mean? My daughter asked as we looked over the legal document together at the kitchen table. It means they're claiming I somehow manipulated Mom into changing her will, I explained, or that she wasn't mentally competent when she made the changes. My daughter scoffed. That's ridiculous. Grandma was sharp as a tack right up until the end. And you didn't even know about the codicil. I know that, and you know that, I said. But they're desperate. This is a lot of money to them. I called my mother's lawyer immediately, and he wasn't surprised by the development. I expected this, he said calmly. Don't worry too much. Your mother prepared extensively for this possibility. I've already drafted our response. Over the next few weeks, a flurry of legal documents went back and forth. My aunt's lawyer demanded copies of my mother's medical records, claiming they would prove she wasn't mentally capable of making such a complex legal arrangement. They requested detailed financial records, trying to prove I had somehow benefited financially during my time as her caregiver. What they didn't know was that I had kept meticulous records of every penny spent on my mother's care, including receipts for groceries, medications, and even gas for trips to doctor's appointments. I had never mixed my finances with hers, maintaining separate accounts and clear boundaries despite living in the same house. My mother's lawyer submitted these records along with affidavits from her doctors confirming her mental clarity, and statements from her friends who had visited regularly during her illness. The journal she had left in the safe proved particularly valuable, as it demonstrated her clear awareness of family dynamics and her deliberate planning. Your aunt's lawyer has requested a mediation session, my lawyer informed me after about 2 months of this back and forth. I think they're starting to realize how weak their case is. Do I have to see them again? I asked, dreading another confrontation. It would be best if you attended, he advised. But I'll be there with you the entire time, and you don't have to speak directly to them if you don't want to. The mediation session was scheduled for a Friday morning in early December, almost 3 months after my mother's passing. I barely slept the night before, anxious about facing their accusations and hostility again. My daughter insisted on coming with me for moral support, though she wouldn't be allowed in the actual mediation room. I'll be right outside, she promised. And afterward, we're going to that nice cafe for lunch, no matter how it goes. When we arrived at the mediator's office, my aunt and her family were already there, huddled together in the waiting area. My aunt looked up as we entered, her face tightening with barely suppressed anger. My uncle nodded stiffly. My cousins didn't acknowledge us at all. The mediator, a retired judge with a reputation for fairness, called us all into a conference room. He explained the process. Each side would present their position, then he would offer his assessment of the legal merits and suggest a potential compromise. My aunt's lawyer went first, presenting their case with plenty of legal jargon but little substance. The core of their argument was that my mother couldn't possibly have devised such an elaborate scheme on her own, that I must have influenced her, and that the test itself was an unconscionable manipulation. My client simply expressed natural surprise at an unexpected distribution, the lawyer argued. To use their honest reactions as the basis for disinheriting them is fundamentally unfair and contrary to the deceased's true wishes. Throughout his presentation, my aunt nodded vigorously. My uncle kept glancing at the mediator, trying to gauge his reaction. My cousins looked bored and checked their phones periodically. When it was our turn, my mother's lawyer methodically dismantled their arguments point by point. He presented the timeline of when the codicil was created, well before I had any knowledge of it, the medical evaluations confirming my mother's competence, and statements from the witnesses to the codicil who confirmed she had explained her reasoning clearly to them. Furthermore, he added, pulling out the final piece of evidence, I have here the deceased's journal, in which she documented numerous instances of the plaintiff's disrespectful behavior toward both herself and her daughter over a period of years. These entries provide clear context for why she felt this unusual arrangement was necessary. He read several entries aloud, including one from Christmas that particularly stung. My sister spent exactly 45 minutes at our family gathering today before claiming she had another engagement. Before leaving, she asked me privately if I had sorted out my will properly, and reminded me that her children had always admired my jewelry collection. Not once did she ask how I was feeling or if I needed anything. Meanwhile, my daughter cooked a beautiful meal, made the house festive despite my illness, and sat up with me all night when the pain was too much to bear. My aunt's face flushed red as the entries were read. My cousins finally looked up from their phones, clearly uncomfortable. The mediator listened to both sides without expression, occasionally making notes. When both lawyers had finished, he cleared his throat. Having reviewed the evidence presented, I must inform you, he looked directly at my aunt and her lawyer, that I find the case for contesting this will extremely weak. The deceased took extraordinary measures to document her mental capacity, her reasoning, and her intentions. The codicil was properly executed according to state law. The condition she established, while unusual, is not unprecedented in a state law, and the court generally respects a testator's clearly expressed wishes. My aunt started to protest, but the mediator held up his hand. Additionally, he continued, I feel obligated to point out that should this case proceed to court, there is a significant risk that the no contest clause will be invoked, resulting in the complete forfeiture of the modest bequest you were granted. The room fell silent. My aunt and uncle exchanged glances. Their lawyer leaned over and whispered something to them. After a brief, hushed discussion, my aunt's lawyer straightened up. My clients would be willing to consider a settlement, he announced. What kind of settlement? My lawyer asked. Perhaps a more equitable distribution of assets, my aunt's lawyer suggested. Say, 60% to your client, 40% to my clients. I was stunned by the audacity. Even after everything, they were still trying to get a significant portion of my mother's estate. Before my lawyer could respond, the mediator spoke again. Given the overwhelming evidence supporting the validity of the codicil, I don't see any legal basis for such a distribution. The risk here is entirely on the contesting side. After more whispered conversations, my aunt's lawyer tried again. Perhaps 20%? That would be a fair compromise to avoid prolonged litigation. My lawyer looked at me questioningly. I shook my head slightly. My client is not interested in a monetary settlement, he stated firmly. The deceased's wishes were clear, and we intend to honor them exactly as written. My aunt suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd. My sister would never have done this to me if she had been thinking clearly. It's vindictive and cruel. The mediator regarded her calmly. On the contrary, the evidence suggests your sister gave this matter a great deal of careful thought. The video testimony, in particular, explains her reasoning quite explicitly. She was manipulated, my aunt insisted, pointing at me. She's always been jealous of our success, our lifestyle. She turned my sister against me. The journal entries date back 5 years, the mediator pointed out. That would require an implausibly long-term manipulation. My aunt's lawyer placed a restraining hand on her arm, urging her to sit down. She shrugged him off but did return to her seat, fuming silently. If there's no settlement to be reached, the mediator concluded, my recommendation is that the contest be withdrawn. Based on the evidence I've seen today, I do not believe it would succeed in court, and the financial risk to the plaintiffs is considerable. After another whispered conference, my aunt's lawyer sighed. We'll need time to consider our options. Of course, the mediator agreed. I'll give you 1 week to formally withdraw your contest. After that, we'll proceed to scheduling court dates. As we left the conference room, my aunt approached me in the waiting area where my daughter sat. Her face was a mask of cold fury. I hope you're happy, she hissed. You've destroyed our family over money. For a moment, I was speechless. Still the peacekeeper, the one who avoided conflict. But something had changed in me since reading my mother's journal and letter. I found my voice. No, I said quietly but firmly. This was never about money for me. It was about caring for Mom because I loved her. You're the ones who immediately started dividing up her possessions while mocking me in the lawyer's office. You're the ones who made cruel jokes about the teapot she left me. You're the ones who told me to vacate my home within a month. If our family is destroyed, you did that all by yourselves. My aunt opened her mouth to retort, but my daughter stepped between us. I think we're done here, she said, her voice level but firm. Come on, Mom. We have lunch plans, remember? We walked out together, my heart pounding but my head held high. 5 days later, we received notification that my aunt and her family had formally withdrawn their contest of the will. The letter from their lawyer was terse and devoid of any apology or acknowledgement, but it was over. My mother's wishes would be respected. The house and all other assets would transfer to me without further legal complications. In the months that followed, I gradually began to rebuild my life. The security of owning the house outright removed a huge financial burden, allowing me to cut back my nursing hours and focus on things I'd neglected during my years as a caregiver. I took an art class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try. I started transforming the backyard into a garden sanctuary, just as my mother had suggested in her letter. My daughter visited often, sometimes bringing friends from college. She'd sit with me in the garden, talking about her classes, her hopes for the future. One afternoon, as we drank tea from my mother's blue teapot, she asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. Do you think Grandma was right to do what she did? With the will, I mean? I thought about it carefully before answering. I think she did the best she could with a difficult situation. She saw things clearly, maybe more clearly than I did, and she wanted to protect me. Was it a bit manipulative? Maybe, but it also revealed the truth in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. They were so awful that day, my daughter said, shaking her head. I still can't believe the things they said. People show you who they really are when they think they have nothing to gain by pretending, I replied, echoing my mother's words from her codicil. I'm just grateful she saw them so clearly and prepared accordingly. We fell silent, watching a butterfly land on one of the new flowers. It was peaceful, this new life. Different, but peaceful. About 6 months after the mediation session, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address showed it was from my female cousin. Curious and a bit wary, I opened it. Inside was a brief, handwritten note. I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the will reading and afterward. I was terrible to you, and I'm sorry. The things we said were cruel and inexcusable. Aunt was right about us. We were only thinking about what we could get, not about what she meant to you or how you had cared for her. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that at least one of us regrets how we behaved. Mom and Dad are still angry, but I can't keep carrying this guilt. Take care of yourself. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, and it didn't undo the hurt they had caused, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that perhaps my mother's final lesson had reached at least one of them. I kept the note, though I didn't respond to it. Some bridges, once burned, can't easily be rebuilt. But I appreciated the gesture for what it was. A recognition of truth, however belated. That spring, on the 1-year anniversary of my mother's passing, I held a small gathering in her honor. Friends from the neighborhood came, along with some of her former colleagues from the school where she had taught. My daughter flew in for the weekend. We planted a cherry tree in the backyard, shared memories, and raised glasses in a toast to a remarkable woman who had known exactly who she was and what mattered to her. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the garden watching the sunset, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. My mother had given me many gifts throughout her life: love, support, encouragement, wisdom. But her final gift might have been the most precious of all: the truth, painful as it was, and the freedom that came with seeing it clearly. The blue teapot sits on my kitchen shelf now, used almost daily. It's nothing special to look at, a bit chipped on the spout, the blue glaze faded from years of use, but when I hold it, I feel connected to her. I remember our afternoon talks, her laughter, the way she listened so intently when I spoke. Sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones that can be listed in a will or assessed by a lawyer. Sometimes they're the lessons we learn, the memories we cherish, the love that continues long after someone is gone. My mother knew that all along, and in her final, clever act, she made sure I would know it too. Update: 1 year later. It's been 2 years since my mother passed away, and so much has changed that I wanted to share an update on how things turned out after all the drama with her will. First, the legal stuff is completely resolved. After my aunt and her family withdrew their contest, there were no further challenges. The house is officially mine, along with all of my mother's other assets. I used some of the money to pay off my car and set up a college fund for my future grandchildren. My daughter isn't even dating anyone seriously yet, but Mom taught me to plan ahead. Speaking of my daughter, she graduated with honors and just started her first real job in the city. She's renting an apartment with friends, but comes home regularly for our Sunday dinners, which have become a cherished tradition. Sometimes she brings colleagues or friends who don't have family nearby. Mom would have loved that. She always said our table had room for one more. The garden sanctuary I started creating is now thriving. I've added a small pond with water lilies, several bird feeders, and a cozy seating area surrounded by flowering shrubs. It's become my haven, especially in the early mornings when the birds are singing and the light is soft. I often sit there with my coffee, in Mom's blue teapot of course, and feel a sense of peace I didn't think possible during those difficult final months of her illness. I've cut back to part-time nursing, which gives me time to volunteer teaching art at the senior center. Turns out those community art classes awakened something in me. I'm not great, but I love it, and seeing the joy on my elderly students' faces when they create something beautiful is incredibly rewarding. As for my aunt and her family, there have been some unexpected developments. My male cousin hasn't spoken to me since the mediation session. My uncle sends a stiff, formal Christmas card each year with no personal message. But my aunt and my female cousin have both, separately, made tentative steps toward reconciliation. My female cousin's letter was just the beginning. About 6 months ago, she asked if we could meet for coffee. She was clearly nervous, and our conversation was awkward at first, but gradually we found our way to a more honest discussion. She admitted that her parents had always painted me as the less successful family member, someone to be pitied or looked down upon. Seeing my home and garden, hearing about my volunteer work, she realized how wrong that perception had been. "You have a real life," she said, looking around at my garden. "I have a fancy car and a designer wardrobe, but my apartment feels empty most of the time. I'm starting to think Aunt had the right idea about what actually matters. We're not close, but we text occasionally now. She's starting therapy to work through some of her family dynamics issues. I wish her well." The most surprising development came 3 months ago when my aunt showed up unannounced on my doorstep. She looked older, more subdued than I remembered. "I wanted to see the garden my sister loved so much," she said simply. I hesitated, then invited her in. We walked through the garden in awkward silence until she suddenly stopped by the cherry tree we had planted in Mom's honor. "She always did love cherry blossoms," my aunt murmured. Then, unexpectedly, her composure cracked. "I was horrible, wasn't I? To both of you." I didn't deny it. "You were. I was so jealous," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "You two were so close. She came to you when she got sick, not me. I was her sister. She came to me because I invited her without hesitation," I said gently. "There was never any competition until you created one." She nodded, wiping away tears. "My therapist says I've spent my whole life comparing and competing instead of connecting. It took losing my sister and nearly destroying what family I have left to see it. We're not friends, my aunt and I. There's too much history, too much hurt for that. But we've reached a kind of truce. She visits occasionally, always calling ahead now. We have tea in the garden and talk mostly about neutral topics, the weather, community news, books we've read. Sometimes she mentions my mother, sharing memories from their childhood that I never knew. Those moments feel like small gifts. My uncle still refuses any contact, convinced I somehow manipulated everything for financial gain. My male cousin follows his lead. That's their choice, and I've made peace with it. Not every family fracture can be mended, and sometimes maintaining distance is the healthiest option. The most profound change, though, has been within myself. For so long, I was the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over, who accepted slights and insults to keep the peace. My mother's final test changed that. It taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and others is to let the truth be known, no matter how uncomfortable. I've become more assertive, more willing to establish boundaries, more comfortable with conflict when it's necessary. I've also become more discerning about who gets a place in my life. I value authenticity over appearance, kindness over achievement, genuine connection over social obligation. These were all lessons my mother tried to teach me while she was alive, but sometimes the most important lessons take the longest to learn. Last week, I was going through some old photos and found one of my mother and me from about 20 years ago. We were sitting in this very garden, laughing about something now forgotten. What struck me was how content we both looked, not because everything in our lives was perfect, but because we had what mattered most, each other. I framed that photo and placed it next to the blue teapot on my kitchen shelf. Every morning when I make my tea, I see it and remember, the true inheritance my mother left me wasn't her house or her savings. It was the example of a life well lived, with clear eyes, an open heart, and the courage to stand in her truth. That's a legacy worth more than any will could ever specify, and one I hope to pass on someday too. Anyway, thank you for watching.